I entitled my little piece, Social Witness for a Realigned Protestantism. I want to begin with something of an autobiographical slant so that, as we used to say in the 60s, you know where I'm coming from. My graduate school days were immersed in the liberal idealism of the pre-60s, 1960 and 65. I consider the 60s to be 65 to 75. My teachers were activists in civil rights, urban ministry, and community organization movements at the time. My doctor father wrote two famous books of that era, The Suburban Captivity of the Churches and New Creation as Metropolis. I was deeply involved in King's civil rights movement in Chicago, identified strongly with urban ministry and community organization movement, especially the Woodlawn organization on the south side of Chicago. When I began teaching at the Lutheran School of Theology in 1965, I was brimming with that liberal idealism and conveyed it to my students, many of whom went into urban ministry. I was excited about the church as an instrument of social and political transformation and focused on that as the primary mission of the church. The proclamation of the gospel seemed pretty retrograde and boring beside the prospect of rebuilding a just American society. Get the church where the action is, out of the pulpit into the streets. I was riding high as the house radical until the real 60s came along. The tremendous upheaval of that decade shook me to my roots. The civil rights movement became black power. The student movement became violent. The anti-war movement became anti-American. Riots, mass marches, protest rallies, burnings, and assassinations gave an apocalyptic hue to that awesome time. I tried to follow the movements as they lurched to the left, but simply couldn't. I had a crisis of conscience and decided I had to be honest with myself. I simply did not believe the exaggerated analyses and revolutionary prescriptions of the radicals. Not only that, I saw a huge abyss yawning between the radical elite of the churches and the laity. The laity were for the most part conservative and didn't follow the radicals. Moreover, they had a deep conviction that social and political action was not the main mission of the church. The time came for reassessment of my own beliefs. I became convinced that the American project, its politics, economics, culture, were not the cesspool depicted by the left. But more importantly, I saw that the mission of the church was the proclamation of the gospel, the full Trinitarian faith, and that social and political witness was decisively secondary. What's more, I began to think that the church should not be tethered too tightly to any political ideology or movement. The danger of secularization and instrumentalization of the faith was simply too great. So that became a period of great transition for me, one that put me at odds with my church and its religious intellectuals, who were mostly on the left, though not many of them real radicals. In the social, economic, and political realm, I began to come to more conservative conclusions than I ever thought possible, given my training and early teaching. I began reading the early neoconservatives such as Irving Kristol and Norman Podhoretz, followed soon by Michael Novak and Richard Newhouse. They gave me great comfort because I was thinking the same things. I began to write in that vein, whole books in defense of market economic systems, the American dream, civil religion. Now in the church, I became publicly critical of the consistently left-wing tilt of the Lutheran Church in America and then the Evangelical Lutheran Church in America. I was and am infuriated about their continual harassment of Israel. The head of the powerful church and society division of the Lutheran Church in America warned me many years ago that I would have no role in the church's social witness if I continued in the direction I was going. He was right. But there are other venues to hold forth. Now I'm outside of the church into which I was born, but the main reason I'm on the outside doesn't have centrally to do with their biased social witness. It has to do more with crucial issues, central issues, the authority of Scripture and the great tradition of Christian moral teaching, and the deflation of the gospel of redemption into the gospel of inclusion. But I have strong opinions about the proper social witness of the church, which have come to be extended in some fashion into the North American Lutheran Church and into the Missouri Synod Lutherans. I fervently believe that we should speak out less, but more authoritatively on a selected set of issues out of our own theological, ethical principles, not out of the political fads of the day. There are certain issues that Christians of all stripes should rally about, but those are limited. And how the Israelis defend themselves is certainly not one of them. I puzzled all this through a book I published recently called Good and Bad Ways to Think About Religion and Politics. Your life will be incomplete without it. There are a number of theses in this book. One, it is bad and impossible to separate religion and politics or to fuse them. Religion in its organized form should engage critically with politics. The church's best and most important way to influence political life is indirectly through the formation of its laity, who will then become voters and political actors in society as well as participants in voluntary associations. But the church does have a modest, but a direct but modest role. It should speak out on some issues, but it should be quite aware that the movement from core Christian moral convictions to public policy is a jagged one. It moves through at least 3 or 4 concentric circles from the core to public policy, and at each step of that movement, Christians of goodwill and intelligence disagree. Further, we are conditioned, I'm fully aware of, by influences that do not come from our core convictions, but in fact enter into our political judgments, and we should be honest about that. So in most cases, there is no warrant for the church to speak and act directly. But there are limits. There are some policies that are so wicked that they so obviously violate the core that Christians must resist and simply say no. And I believe there are about 4 general directions that most Christians should agree upon as they move from core to policy. Those are the provision of an adequate safety net for our society for those who are unable to make their way in it, children, wounded veterans, physically and mentally handicapped persons. Number 1. Number 2, the protection of nascent human life. Number 3, the upholding of the fundamental social unit of society, traditional marriage and the nuclear family. And number 4, religious freedom. That we agree on the general direction of these values does not mean that the argument over public policy is over, but it does put us pretty much on the same page. The proper social witness of the church is very important. We should at all costs avoid tethering ourselves too closely to any political party or ideology. We should draw on our own wells when we speak, not from secular political nostrums. We should carefully discern which issues we are called upon to speak. They should be few, perhaps only those where we have to say no. But when we must speak, we must speak. In the meantime, however, let's hope and pray that our parishes are doing the work of the formation of the laity, where resides the long-ranging, pervasive political influence. One well-formed Christian senator is worth 10,000 statements. Right there.